So thank you all for joining us for the Using Your Student Voice, Engaging Entry Policymakers workshop. Joining us today are Nicole Thomas, a curriculum instruction doctoral student, graduate research assistant, and GPSA president. Sorry about that. Jason Dagger, political science master student and staffer for Commissioner Justin Jones, District F at Clark County, and Cecilia Gonzalez, PhD student in multicultural education, Nevada State Assembly member, and graduate assistant for the Center for Multicultural Education. So they're going to discuss basics of contacting your legislator, making your voice heard, and submitting your opinions and comments on agenda items that affect higher education. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to them just to introduce themselves, and then we're going to go ahead and open it up for questions. So I'll pass it on to Nicole.
Perfect. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Nevina, for the introduction. I'm Nicole Thomas. I am the current president of the Graduate and Professional Student Association. During my undergraduate career, I was involved with CSUN undergraduate student government, and that's where I really learned about how to lobby your legislatures, how to get involved in the process, and really just how to connect with people and to fight for higher education. So I'm a PhD student in curriculum and instruction, focusing on science education.
Jason?
Perfect. Thank you. So my name is Jason Dagger. My pronouns are he and him. I currently am in my master's program for political science, and I graduate in 2 months, 45 days. And so like Nicole, where we actually met, I was in CSUN student government as well. I was the vice president as well as other things before that. And I learned a lot about advocacy work and how to get engaged in the community and talk to local nonprofits and advocacy groups. From there, I entered with the ACLU. They are a civil liberties advocacy organization whose main job is to sue the government when we are messing up. And they did great work. I did a lot of good experience there, and I currently work and before that, after that, I worked for Senator Jackie Rosen and now for Commissioner Justin Jones doing advocacy work in local government. And I'm so excited to be here and answer any questions you all have. And I'll pass it over to Cecilia.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk about this topic. I think it's extremely important. I am also in the same department as Nicole. I'm in the curriculum and instruction department in my PhD, but my focus area is multicultural education. And my background is criminal justice. And so I really study the intersections of criminal justice and education and how we create policies that unfortunately tap children into the criminal justice system. Prior to running for office, I was very involved in my community, doing various things. I was very involved with the Mass Liberation Project. I care a lot about reforming our criminal justice system and really just, having this mindset of not throwing people away, right? And so prior to running for office, I was involved with a number of different organizations, and I had been going up to session probably since the year, I think 2013, I think was the first session that I had ever gone up there to protest or lobby. I think 2013 was my first protest year, and then 2015 was the first year that we really I learned the importance of lobbying and public comment and talking to your legislators. So all that is to say, I ended up running for office myself. And so I've been on both sides, and I'm really excited to have this conversation with you all.
Well, thank you all for your introductions and for being here with us today. So just to get us started, we'll go ahead and jump right in. As a graduate student, what types of policies do I have the potential to change?
Nicole, Nicole, you want to take that one?
Sure. I'll take it and then I'll bounce it back to you afterwards, because I think you definitely have a good perspective on it, Cecilia. But from my perspective, it's anything dealing with students or higher education. So anything at the state or local level, particularly maybe with redistricting, so for example, right now, the Clark County School District is redistricting. So if you're really passionate about figuring out like where schools are going to be situated, where students are going to be situated, that's the process that you could get involved with in terms of reviewing where the districts are, what the proposed changes are, and then providing your suggestions. So anything dealing with students is incredibly important to have the student voice like associated with it. Because a lot of times they are voting on funding at the legislative level, where they're trying to decide on how much funding to cut for higher education or how much funding to put towards a specific program. And being able to hear from students when it comes to those budgetary bills, I think is incredibly important.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. So I personally don't sit on any of the money committees, so I can't speak to that. But it is really important. Higher education and the policies and us fighting for funding. I think historically we have fought for funding like in the South, right? And so I think that it is very important to show up and tell legislators like, hey, if I'm sitting in testimony and there's we have to make a decision on are we going to fund this program or are we going to fund this program? And there's a lot of people that come in support of the program. Maybe we as legislators didn't know how important it was to students or impactful it was, right? So it's very important to make sure you're reaching out to your legislators, having a social media campaign, making sure that the community's voice around topics that impact you are at the forefront, right?
Absolutely. So a lot of issues can also be addressed based beginning at the local level. So like Nicole said, since I started working for the Clark County Commission last year, I looked at a lot of policies that are research led and went forward. So a big example Nicole talked about is redistricting. It is happening right now. It is happening for these next couple months, and they're probably the most important moment for the next decade in terms of policy advocacy. And so, for example, a research student, a graduate student, approached me from the University of Georgia and sent me their research about language barriers existing for immigrant communities when it comes to starting a new business. So at the county, I was able to work with a small business tech firm to create an online system for registering a business, researching maps where the business is permitted, and the breakdowns of all the costs associated with starting a business. Currently at the county, this doesn't exist. Usually, if you're an immigrant like myself, and you come here and you do not speak the main two languages, you don't have access to starting a business other than hiring a law firm that can rob you from your money. And this has happened to a lot of AAPI small businesses when they first started. And so this is something that we're all very passionate about. So this program will officially kickstart later next year, and it will offer 14 languages to kickstart this program. So instead of it being completely in person with only an English interpreter or hiring a law firm, now you can do this yourself and not only save those additional costs, but to continue going. So policies can change locally based off of the research you're doing, and that includes whether it's environmental justice, commercial policy, housing policy, infrastructure, accessibility, whatever it looks like. And education is probably the most important. And Cecilia and Nicole are great folks to talk about that.
Thank you all. So we did receive a question in the chat here, and it says, with the Nevada legislature only being in session every 2 years, what types of work occurs in the off season?
That's a great question. And something that I just learned, we just had I'm forgetting. I'm so sorry. I'm blanking on the name. Interim. I just had interim committee training, and I think that there is a misconception that we don't work in the interim. The interim actually allows us to, like during session, you have these big bucket committees, right? And the bills get ciphered through that. But during the interim, there's actually a little more time to get into like the nitty gritty on certain issues. There's like subcategories, and we just revamped the interim committee this last legislative session. So we are going into a new way on how we are doing the interim committee. But I think the interims are a time where it's a time to really work on an issue that you're really passionate about, but also work closely with the legislator, because you don't have like the hustle and bustle of session every day, right? So the interim committee, the interim is a really great time to maybe approach a legislator like, hey, I want to work on this topic, or I know you ran this bill, or what do you guys think about this, or this is an issue in my community, right? And really, connect with them, and maybe you guys can come up with a bill idea. I'll say I'm looking for bill ideas, right? We all get bill allotments for the interim committees. So I definitely think that it's a time where we're able to actually dive more into certain issue and topic areas than if we were in session. And I don't know if Nicole or Jason may have something to add. I really like that Jason talked about the local level, because at the state, we are like the state overall. We do like the state budget. We, pass, we do represent our districts, but when we go up to session, we have to be thinking like about the state as a whole, all Nevadans, right? Whereas where Jason works is more local level. And I don't want to say more impactful, but it's more of like the everyday, right? We had like the COVID mask question mandate where, we had to go to the county commission and either ask or not ask, right? Because everyone deserves their voice heard, right? Of the mask mandate. So there are things where sometimes you kind of have to figure out, like, number one, what is it the issue that you want to work on and how you want to work on it? Do you want to work on it just in Clark County? Do you want to work on it at the state level? Do we maybe want to start in Clark County with like a model, and then, a couple years down the road, we could approach the legislature with, hey, we've been doing this in this area. This is really, something we should do statewide, right? And then you have like city council, right? You have the county commission, you have different elected offices that kind of do different things and filter and kick different things. So just wanted to throw that out there for folks that may, I think there's a lot of focus on the legislature at times. And I just want to make sure that folks know, like, local government is like really important. I don't want to say more important, because I think we're all important, but it's really important too.
Absolutely, Assemblywoman. So I want to talk about something that the President Biden has introduced, which is 30 by 30. It basically means that 30% of our land will be protected by 2030. This is a great environmental justice advocacy that started by a graduate student who found out that even advocating for 30% of natural land, or land to not be developed or used inappropriately, has drastically benefited many nations across the world. And so that actually, one of the first counties that started it was Clark County. So Clark County introduced it by a plug, my boss, and it was approved unanimously. Then it went to the Nevada legislature, and Cecilia was one of the folks who advocated for it, and it passed with strong bipartisan margins. And then now the president is advocating for this, and this is a great way to talk about how local government is important. But also, you have to understand that for the Nevada legislature, they're very accessible. We have the privilege of living in a state where I can text Cecilia to grab coffee, and we can talk about policy. And we can talk about things that I've seen that we can work on at the state level that we're trying to work on the local level, whether that means having more funds for public works, or whether that means including additional fundings for environmental justice departments in the county or in the city. There's so many things that we can do. Another thing that Cecilia really advocated for was fees and penalties. And that is something that we are all very passionate about, and I'm so happy that was addressed. But I actually want to hear from Nicole, from your position as president for graduate students, representing graduate students. What has your experience been like advocating for policy?
So this is actually really interesting, because I have so many students who speak to me about thinking that they don't know enough to be advocating for something. So the vast majority of graduate students that I've talked to, they're like, well, yes, I'm really involved in my research. I know a lot about this specific subject, but I'm not politically inclined or I'm not involved with politics. And you don't you have to view it in a different way. You have to view it as like we are all approaching this from a learning perspective. Like I guarantee you, if you're even interested in the topic, like you will be able to find out enough about it and just read about it and just know about it to be able to have that conversation. Like no one knows what your community is like besides you, you know? So it's like we need to hear from you in order to advocate for you. And I think it's really, really important for graduate students to realize that like they do have that power. Like you are all incredibly intelligent people, you know, like you would not be here if you were not incredibly intelligent people. So I think being able to remind yourself of that and say like, yes, I can take up space in this room. And yes, I do have a part in this process. So important. And that's like what I will always tell students who are like, oh, well, I don't think I should get involved in lobbying. And I'm like, no, that's why you need to get involved in lobbying, because there are so many other people with more money and more resources who are doing it daily. And we might not have the money or the resources, but like we have the human power, you know? So I think it's so incredibly important to use your voice and use your power as a student, just to be able to advocate for what you want and what will help the people that you know and love.
Thank you all, and thank you for sharing that great example of how a graduate student can make an impact, Jason, too. So going back to something Cecilia had mentioned, how the off season can be a really great time to actually talk to folks about bills or ideas and stuff. So to follow up on that, how can we identify the relevant policymakers and staff members that we can actually get in contact with or should get in contact with?
That's a great question. All of our contact information is available on the Nevada Legislative website. So it'll have like our official emails. I think that the phone numbers that are there might be our office numbers. So obviously we're not there. So I would definitely say try shooting an email. To Jason's point, I would say like 95% of our lawmakers are very accessible. So I've, before being in elected office, I've literally tweeted at my elected official and they've gotten back to me like via Twitter or like messaged them on Twitter. A lot of us are on social media. I will say like emails do get lost. So, if you email your legislator and they don't get back to you, like don't take it personally. A lot of us, we're a part-time legislature, so everyone's in their current jobs when we're not up in session. So don't, take it personally, but also, I'm here as a resource. If there's somebody that you need to get in contact with or you would like to know more information about, I'm available. Jason's available. Nicole's available. There are a lot of folks who, have contacts with other folks that, if you're trying to get a hold of another assembly person, I can be like, hey, this person's, trying to get a hold of you, or, what's the best contact you would like me to get them in touch with, right? And I do think that Nevada is very unique to that we are very accessible when it comes to our elected officials, and not even just at the legislature. I mean, the county commission's the same way, city council's the same way. And it can be hard trying to navigate. I definitely want to acknowledge that. And it can be intimidating as well, right? But at the end of the day, like we're people too, and we're, out here in the community. So definitely, my contact information, I feel like is everywhere. I think my cell phone was like on a website at one point and people were calling my personal cell. So definitely reach out if there's specific like topics or specific things that you want to get involved in. When I ran for office, I was actually working with Assemblywoman Wynn on the I'm thinking of the license suspension bill that we passed, but it's not that one. It's the decriminalizing traffic tickets. And I was working with the Mass Liberation Project in the 2019 session. It goes into a study, right? And so I'm showing up at all the meetings, I'm building that relationship. And when it came time for me to run to office, she really encouraged me because she had seen that I was passionate about legislation and the work in the community, right? So you never know what will come out of your experiences working with lawmakers as well.
Absolutely. Also, check their social media. See what they're talking about. Are they focused on environmental justice? Are they focused on housing, the housing crisis, in Nevada. I believe there's 70,000, with a gap of 70,000 homes for low income housing. That's a really big problem, and that includes majority teachers and educators and graduate students. So there's always gaps in policy and research locally that people are noticing and recognizing. So a simple email can go a long way. DMing them is also very accessible. Until I started working for Commissioner Jones, Justin, he had his number in his bio, his personal number. And that was mind-boggling. At first, I was thinking, why would he do that? But the more I started working for him, the more I realized accessibility is very, very important. It's you need to keep a rapport with your constituents and people that you represent, and having that accessibility is really important. And another way that you can also advocate is like work or do a fellowship or internship for a organization that's doing the work that you're interested in. So if you are interested in environmental policy, it'd be the Nevada Conservation League, or many organizations. I can just list them all, but that's the one that's in my head right now. If it's about racial justice, mass liberation, and plan is a great resource. If it's religious advocacy work, Nevadans for the Common Good is a really good organization to talk to and to work with, because a lot of graduate students from other universities come to Las Vegas to do that, and that is not right. And I believe we need to build that bridge to talk to local organizations that are usually across the street from us to work on these policies. So I think social media is a great resource. I think emailing is a great resource, and find out who their staff is. We're pretty loud, all of us. And luckily for the staff, we work 24/7. It becomes like a lifestyle. So finding where we are, what we do, don't just approach us and do that. But a simple DM, a simple message can really go a long way. Say, and that's happened before multiple times, because my boss is a big environmental justice person. So a lot of graduate students who are very STEM organized or public policy, they always reach out to us about that. And so we're always available, always accessible. We work Monday through Thursday for 10 hours every day. And so we are just very accessible. So please reach out to us.
Thank you both. So you already kind of started to touch on this a little bit earlier, Jason, when you talked about how, a graduate student helped impact a change. How can we as graduate students leverage our research to encourage policy changes?
So I could start with that one. Going back to my previous point of you are the person who knows your community the best. Like Jason was saying, they have people coming in all the time from out of state, people with political experience, people with, say they've worked in Washington or something like that. And they're like, I'm interested in studying the desert. So just anything like that. You have a lot of those individuals who have been trained in the traditional sense, but not necessarily knowing what Nevada is like, not necessarily knowing what this community is like. So even if you are an international student, or even if you were coming here and you're only here for 4 years or 6 years, you still know what you need and what the people around you need, because most of the time our research relates back to our community. It's very rare that we are researching something that we're not able to directly interact with. A lot of times the data that you collect comes from the community, comes from the people around you. So all of that information is really important to the different groups of people who make policy. So being able to take that information and synthesize it in such a way where other people who aren't in graduate school are able to understand it, incredibly important. So for you to take your data and to then make it presentable and functional in a way where the average layperson or someone who may not have been through higher education is able to process that and is able to kind of look through that and go, oh, these are the issues that are currently affecting this community. And here is a person who I can trust who has that data to back it up.
Yeah, and I'll say that data and working with like, in graduate, I don't know how everyone's program works, but in my experience in some of the departments that I've been in grad school, there are grants where you can work with like an organization to create like an internal report on whatever the topic may be, right? So I was sitting in a hearing. This was like the first, I think, 2 weeks of session, and I had asked a question, and the person responded about with the study that these graduate students had used. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh my gosh, I was part of that study. Like I was one of the person who was like interviewing, it was like about like sexually exploited children or whatever. And I just was like so excited because I was like, wow, like this stuff kind of really does have an impact. And so I think like, number one, getting involved with an organization or on a research grant or project that you're very passionate about, right? So I'm about to get ready to do a research project around CRT and like education, and I'm like super excited about that. So if there's like organizations that you can work with, like I said, I got involved because I was working on decriminalizing traffic tickets, because that is like a huge reason of why people, specifically low income communities of color, right, get into contact with officers and justice, right? And so that led to X, Y, and Z things, and we were finally able to pass decriminalizing traffic tickets the fifth time this session. So it's really cool to see like how research is very important. We joked around like with these, like if we had a shirt like from session, what would it say? And mine was like, show me the data, right? Like every time, there was a problem, I would always say like, well, where's the data? What do we know and what don't we know? Because both are important as well, right? And so I think that when we talk about policy, it's not the end all be all, but data and anecdotal stuff is really important too, right? Because data and research can be sensitive when we talk about like certain communities and what that means, right? But I just get, as you could see, I'm very animated and excited about research and data and how it really is important, because again, what we know and what we don't know helps us as lawmakers navigate how to make the best formed policy as we can.
So my research field is very data, like data R focused, and so most of what I look at is numbers and graphs and charts, and so I definitely agree that that's really important. What is the barrier between research and policymakers sometimes is the language access. For a lot of policymakers, they are not uh, graduate students, or they didn't graduate from graduate school. They don't have PhDs. They're our everyday working class. And so I have this problem. So my research is about abortion rights in Europe, a very niche topic. In Europe, as there's always large support, but what I have realized as I'm writing my thesis is that I am trying to write something for other political science um, focused brains. And political science and politicians and policymakers are very different. And they don't agree on a lot of things. But one way that can work is to write an op-ed about your research and how it's impacting your local community. Another way to talk about it is have a social media thread and talk about it where folks from the community are learning about what you're writing about. I mean, if you're only keeping it to yourself and your graduate coordinator, it's not really beneficial to people on the ground about that. And so a really big thing is, well, researchers always state the problem, never the solution. Sometimes it's not for us to find the solution. Sometimes we do the research and we give it to Assemblywoman Gonzalez or Nicole or a local organization who is advocating for the issue area and say, hey, here's my research. What have you seen that's worked to address some of the issues? And from there, using that, you can go and do a lot of good work with that nonprofit. Whether, I mean, make sure it's paid first of all, because we what is it? Exposure doesn't pay the bills, and so make sure to publish it, summarize it, make it accessible to everyday folks who want to be experts in your field. Meet with your elected official and discuss it, and that is how folks go from uh, researching to a a profound result of a positive change in their community. And that goes whether it's curriculum, or if it is environmental justice, whether it is racial justice. And housing is a really big gap in research locally. So anyone who is doing communications, public policy, anything STEM related, if there's a way to target it where it's a local issue, then we can get to a solution. Because I mean, it feels good to fix problems. It really does. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you for providing us with some actionable strategies there. So what are some ways we can make our research more accessible to policymakers?
Okay. Oh, I love this topic because I came from a science background. So my bachelor's is in biology, ecology, and evolution. And after I got my degree, I realized that I couldn't actually talk to anyone about biology because all that I knew was just like, well, I knew a lot, but it was very technical terms, very textbook, very much like, oh, mom and dad, you won't understand this. Like, I got this. Um, and that is not a way to function in society. That is a way to function with other academics at conferences. But at the end of the day, like, I think it's something like what 3% of people have a PhD and 9% of people have a master's. That's not a lot of society, you know. So the vast majority of people that you interact with, you're going to have to be able to explain things at a level where everyone is able to process that understanding. Something that helped me a lot was forming a 3-minute thesis. So the grad college has a wonderful program where it's like the 3-minute thesis competition. But during I took a gap year between my bachelor's and my master's. And during that time, I was like, okay, how can I practice what I did for the last 4 years? Like, how can I tell people about this? So being able to summarize your research in a small amount of time, think about it as an elevator pitch. Like, if you get stuck in an elevator with someone and they're like, oh, so what do you do on a daily basis? Or what's your research in? You're able to talk about it in such a way where they're not going to be completely freaked out by the end of it and they're not clawing to get out of the elevator. You know, instead, they're like, okay, that's really interesting and I could 100% see why you're passionate about this. So being able to just think about like you're teaching it to a class of elementary students, or think about you're trying to explain it to one of your relatives. Being able to process your research in that way will really be beneficial when it comes to explaining what you do to policymakers, because they're not going to stand here and listen to me go through like what PCR is, where I'm like, okay, we take a DNA extraction and we do this. They're like, okay, great. What's the end goal? What's the purpose of that? And that's what you really need to hone in on, is that big picture of why my research is important.
So something that I always recommend is taking like a communications training, either within your college or through the graduate program. I remember in my undergrad, I took one of the communications classes, the trainings in the graduate program, and it was very helpful because it allows me to it allows me from one perspective to see the other side of my research. If I had to sit down and listen to somebody talk about democratic values and abortion rights and their relationship, it'd be really weird, because it's not really digestible. But if I'm able to change the way I approach the conversation, where it's more personal, and have it be a conversation rather than it's me trying to teach you something, is important. So before, if you're interested in a topic, what I will always recommend, and you want it to turn into policy, is to meet with and not an expert in the field, but a policymaker who is looking to fix that gap. Ask them, what is the problem in the city, state, county? Where is the gap in research? And once you know that gap, then you can go and administer either the research or find some background that sometimes the policymakers are not really accessible to. It's very interesting, and Cecilia can talk about this because we're on both ends, where we are the policymakers, but we're also the researchers. and that relationship is very rare to have both. So I do agree with Nicole, making your research digestible, and that's why I always think op-eds are a really good way to do that. And talking to people who do communications in your field. So in San Diego, in the political science department, there is a communication strategist, whose sole purpose is to how to make political science digestible to elected officials. I know there's this big master's program for folks in STEM, and specifically medicine and vaccines, whose focus is communications. And so they have all this research. How can we release it to the public where it is easily understandable, and it's a good way to educate the public on it, and go from there. I always think bouncing ideas off of other graduate students is a really good idea, especially when they're not in your field. So, for example, when I am about to finish my paper, I'm probably going to talk to Nicole and say, hey, I finished this. Let me summarize. Let me give you my 3-minute summary of my research, and tell me, do you understand this? Is this digestible? Does it make sense? And does it matter? And I think that's the overall picture. And the chair of my committee is always like, who cares? You need to think about it, like who actually cares about what you're writing, and are you trying to advocate for something? Because then that changes the way I word things, that changes my conclusion and my research and my control variables and all that stuff. So having those conversations with folks internally in the graduate college, and the graduate college is really good at connecting you with folks who are not in your field, and that's something that I've been very, very thankful for. I've been meeting with sociology professors and communications professors, and it's been very helpful for me to figure out what is the best way that I can communicate it, make it look presentable, make it look pretty, and have it be understanding of different categories within political science.
Thank you, Jason. Does timing matter when it comes to determining when to engage policymakers of interest?
I'll take that question. Timing is absolutely super mega important. I think that for me as a freshman, one of the things that I learned the most is the earlier you start, the better, especially if we have a really, big topic that we're trying to do, right? So as early as you can, please reach out to your lawmakers, get started. Sometimes it's even having the conversation, right? I had a number of bills that got hearings that, either didn't get voted on or were part of legislative record, right? Where we can come back the next session and say, okay, we started to have this conversation, right? I think of, excuse me, sorry, Assemblywoman Danielle Moreno's bill on ending the use of private prisons, right? I think it took her 2, maybe 3 legislative sessions to get that through the finish line, which was actually part of, I want to say, the 2019 session. And so, sometimes it is just having the conversation. Sometimes we don't even get hearings, right? But it's still important that we start as early as we can. For example, the driver's license suspension bill that actually went into effect October 1, where folks can no longer be your license can no longer be suspended for debt-based fees. If I don't pay my traffic ticket, my license can no longer get suspended, right? This is a bill that I carried with the Senate Majority Leader, and it has taken us 10 years, right? Over 10 years for us to get this across the finish line. And so, they started in the 90s, right? So as early as you can start, the better. And also just really building like collaboration too. The decriminalizing traffic tickets bill had so many different members of the community on the bill. Assemblywoman Wynn was very diligent on having everyone's voice at the table. I was a co-sponsor of that bill, and sometimes we would have meetings with all the different stakeholders, right? We call them stakeholders, community members. So it's really important to start as early as you can, to start identifying folks that can be on the bill, that can help carry the bill, that can help give insight to legislation. And I think what's really awesome about policy is like you never know who's going to come in support of a bill, right? There was a bill that you all can look up, but there was a bill this last legislative session that had like the ACLU and like the police unions all on like the same page, right? So it's kind of interesting, really. And so the earlier you can get started, the better, because you want to be as prepared as possible when you go to either testify or present your bill. What are the pros and cons? Who is on what side, right? And stuff happens during session too that you just never know. I had a bill this last session that dealt with good time credits in our prisons for COVID, and I just remember like putting the bill in and thinking like, oh, this isn't going to go anywhere. Like, we're just going to try, right? And it was like the only bill that the governor, I think, of mine that had my own name on it, like just my name signed into policy, right? And I would have never thought that at the end of session, like, folks were going to get credits for missing due to COVID. So you never know what can happen or what you can negotiate to get like out of your bill as well. Hopefully that was helpful. Which is why I think like the interim committees are really, really important, because a lot of the bills that, not a lot, but some of the bills that we passed in session, folks had been working on them in the interim for the last year, 2 years. I have a colleague that one of the bills that she had been working on a year prior, I think like a year and a half prior to it even coming to be a bill, right? So as earliest, the better.
So to kind of follow up a bit on that, what are some ways that we can sustain and amplify our engagement after that initial contact?
Oh my gosh. Follow up, please. Initial contact is great. I always love meeting folks, and they tell me their research, and I tell them I'm interested in learning more and seeing how we can incorporate it into the county's policy and ordinances, and after that there is no follow-up from them. And like, as policymakers, as staff of elected officials, like our minds, we in the thrill of it all, we forget a lot of small details, and one of them is we're just busy. So many things are currently happening right now. So asking for a follow-up meeting a few weeks out is really good. Thank them for the initial contact. Say, this is my research, and I'm more than happy to talk with you about it in the next coming weeks. Let me know your availability, and we'll meet up and discuss it. So I think following up is extremely important. I also think talking with orgs. I'm not saying to give them your reason to say you take care of it, but I'm saying talking to orgs and have them endorse this proposal is very important, especially when we have, let's say really big topics. One of the most recent topics that passed through the county commission is having COVID misinformation be a public health crisis. And that was created by a researcher in graduate college for the University of California, San Diego. So from there, San Diego passed it, and the student reached out to Clark County and asked us to pass a similar resolution. But we obviously tailored it to be more local and understanding of local politics as well. So having those follow-up conversations, and whether it's with the policymaker themselves or their staff, is vital to keeping that reputation. Also, like, being in the circle, find out if there's anything that you can volunteer at, or where the elected officials are very accessible. We have, and this is something that I asked the commissioner to do prior to working for him. I was like, when you do this, or I don't feel comfortable working for you, is that we have bi-monthly coffee with the commissioner, where you can sit down, whoever you might be, and have a conversation with the commissioner about something that you're advocating for. And attending these meetings, being present, showing up is really important just to hear what folks in the community are saying. We are currently going through the redistricting process, and I invited all my colleagues in the local science department to attend the hearing yesterday. And we're gonna have multiple hearings throughout the next couple of weeks. And one of the graduate students, their focus is on majority minority districts in Congress. And so I asked him to tailor his research, instead of finding data at the congressional level, to find it at the county level. And his research has actually been very vital to the person who is overseeing our redistricting process, that now we have 2 majority minority districts in the conversation. And one is 30% API, the other one is 51% Latino, and then the other one is 51% Latino as well. So, and this is a huge thing that's never existed in Clark County, and that's all because of a research student in the Department of Political Science. But you don't have to be in political science to advocate for policies for local elected officials. These are just the folks that I know who I called on. So following up is very, very vital.
I want to second what Jason was saying in terms of showing up. So how I got involved in student government is I literally looked up when the meetings were and I showed up. And I did that for my undergrad and I did that for my grad. I started in GPSA my first semester as a master's student, and I went to the meeting and I sat in the audience and I was like, do you have any openings? They were like, nope. I was like, okay. So I emailed my grad coordinator. I was like, are there any openings? They were like, nope. And I'm like, that's fine. I'll keep showing up. I'm interested in what's going on. And every single meeting, I would sit in the audience and I would listen to what was being discussed. And by the time that a position opened up, everyone already knew who I was because I was around. That's so incredibly important, because I meet students all the time at different events who are like, I have this great idea for X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, fantastic. I love that. I want to talk more about this. Like, please email me. And then I don't get an email. We actually, like, if I say that, I 100% want you to email me. Like, do not be afraid to reach out, because I'm so excited to talk about, like, literally anything. I'm like, yes, you are a grad student. I am enthusiastic about this. Jason's cracking up right now because he knows that it's true, because I get into these conversations with people about, like, restructuring our entire government. But, like, at the end of the day, it's so important to talk to people and to show up. And I think just really do follow up with people and just reach out, because there's like 8 different jobs that I'm doing at any one time. I promise I'm not ignoring you on purpose if I let an email slip by. So do not think that you are a burden, like, to anyone, because you're not. You are who we should be serving and who we should be working with.
Thank you. I did just want to remind everyone, if you had any questions you wanted to, you can always unmute yourself, or you can put it in the chat. But while you all think of that, we'll go ahead and go to our next question. And so the next one is, what kind of platforms or journals should I be attempting to get published in for my work to be reputable to policymakers?
That's a great question. I think that first, it's twofold, right? What kind of journals should I be publishing in? And then the second portion was like, to be reputable to policymakers. So I'm just going to be honest. I don't think policymakers sit around reading academic journals unless maybe they work in academia. A lot of, I won't even say a lot of, specifically here in Nevada, we are a part-time legislature, which means that we all have our full-time jobs, right? I just happen to be an academic. I think that there is, I want to say maybe 2 to 5 other academics, like doctoral students. I think Senator Ganser teaches at the university. I think there's another assemblywoman that teaches at a university. And so some of us do work in academia, but I wouldn't ever be like, hey, publish in this journal so that a legislator could read your work, right? I think that you should publish in journals that you want to publish in, right? Because there's like research heavy journals, there's like practitioner journals, right? I come from a mindset very much like I want to make policy where the people who need to be reading it should be reading it, right? I have a very, I think, different view on publishing. But I also want to work in academia. I want to obtain my tenure track job, right? So I know that I also have to publish in other like prestigious academic journals too, right? So I definitely wouldn't say go after a journal in hopes that a legislator would read it, right? You can always send us a manuscript. You can always email your research. You can always work with an agency to get us that data, that information, because we're hungry for it. You know, in Nevada, we lack, I think, a lot of research that I wish we had, right? So we always want research, but you know, specifically for your discipline and what you want to do, and also, you know, the PhDs, a very interesting degree. I mean, it is a terminal degree in a sense of like, you can go into academia, you could go into research, you could work for a think tank, you could be, you know, for me specifically, I think I'm still trying to figure it out, you know, so everyone's path is different. And so if you are wanting to obtain like the traditional path of academia, then it would be being able to publish, you know, before you go on the job market. You know, I think publishing is important, but there's, you know, for me, maybe I want to focus more on maybe like the mentorship, right? Or maybe work at like a junior college, right? So everyone's path is different. And everyone's publishing path is different as well. So I would say, I think that one thing, and I could be going a little off topic here, but one thing that I struggle with as a PhD, and I think as a master's student, was comparing myself to everyone else and their journey and their publishing, and like, you know, don't get caught up in the, like, I have to publish, I have to, like I said, you should want to, you should at least have a publication or two under your belt prior to going on the job market, but also know that like your mere presence in a doc program is like, wow, like you are doing it, right? Like, and I think that sometimes we get caught up on these, like, I need to have this check mark done, right? And especially for me as a woman and as a minority and woman of color, and like, you know, I think that for us, we feel the realities of that even more so, right? So I just wanted to throw that plug in there of like, everyone's journey is very much their journey, and don't get caught up in the, well, all of my peers are doing X, Y, and Z, and I need to do X, Y, and Z, right? Get with your advisor, see what benchmarks and goals you want to set for yourself, see where it is that you want to do with your PhD, right? And kind of go from there. You know, how I got on this research grant that I'm about to work on is because I went to my advisor and I was like, all right, this is like year 2. I need to get on some projects. I need to have something, you know, because that is what I want, right? And so just be mindful of that. And also, like we've been iterating, I think, over and over in this conversation, our lawmakers in our state are so unique that we are very accessible. You do not need to approach me with some fancy publication to be like, hey, Assemblywoman Gonzalez, I care about, you know, why do we use plastic bags? I'm just using that as an example, right? Let's be like California and ban all the plastic bags and only use paper bags, right? I don't need a crazy prestigious, you know, article for you to tell me that that issue is important to you. If y'all would see my emails, of the emails that I get from people, right? And our constituents, you know, I love when constituents come to us with policy ideas. I think of Assemblywoman Heidi Swank, my predecessor, who, you know, there was an issue with a constituent where it had something to do with this like I vaguely remember this person wanted to like work at the dealership, and it was like a certification or something was like wrong in the law where they couldn't do it. So they worked together and they, you know, fixed it, and then years later he was able to like work at the dealership, right? That's like a very real impactful policy that, you know, was just a constituent that was like, hey, I have this problem, is there anything that we could do for me to obtain this job that I really want or something, right? So just reiterating again, you don't even have to have all the answers. You could literally be like, hey, I don't know how we can fix this issue, I don't know what we could do, but this is an issue that I see in my community, right? And I think that at the end of the day, like, we as lawmakers look for that. I love having those conversations with constituents, you know, hey, there's this empty lot in our community that people just trash all day long. Like, can we figure out how we can clean it up or make it a space where, you know, it's welcoming, right? Working with other lawmakers, you know, maybe something like that maybe isn't necessarily something that I could work on, but, you know, I could work with like my commissioner, my city councilwoman to clean up that area or something. So don't ever feel like you need to have all these like prestigious like things to approach your lawmaker, because at the end of the day, I mean, look at me, I'm 29 years old in the legislature, right? I am an everyday person just like you all. And there's a lot, I wouldn't say a lot of us, but you have, you know, Senator Fabian, who's 25, Assemblywoman Torres, who I think is also 25. Like, our young voices are definitely there. And I think that with us as well, like, we can really relate to young folks in our need for wanting our voices to be heard. So sorry that I went on like a big tangent there.
Thank you so much. We did get a question in the chat here. Can anyone draft and submit a bill, or do you have to work with a policymaker?
Great question. So there are a certain amount of bills that are allotted to every person, and then there's like agencies that get bills as well. Like the Attorney General's office, I think, gets like a number of bills. You do have to work with either an agency that gets bills or a lawmaker to be able to submit a BDR. There's also this like idea that we like sit and write our like laws. We absolutely don't, right? Like, there have been times where I've submitted a bill and I'm like, this is all I know I want it to accomplish. I have no idea. Whereas other times, you know, organizations will have like, this is the draft language we want, right? This is what we want to target. So we have what's called the LCB, which is the Legislative Counsel Bureau, who writes all of the legal bills and policies for us. They do all of our legal research. So we as lawmakers, you know, when I wanted to do the 30 by 30, right, I said, hey, I want to create a bill draft that will protect 30% of our land and water. I want to work with local agencies, right? And that bill in particular, because Nevada is unique and so much of of our land is owned by the federal government, it wasn't a bill, it was a resolution, right? So there's like resolutions, there's bills, there's study bills, right? So it just depends on how you want to approach the issue, right? You know, maybe we don't have any information. Maybe we need to submit and say, hey, this is an important issue. We know it's impacting people. Let's study this in the interim. And that is a bill that we would submit, right? So I say, like, work with organizations and lawmakers to figure out if they have an allotment. You know, a lot of my bills, community members came to me and was like, hey, we want to run this bill. Do you have a bill request available? Yes, here you go, right? And so definitely connect with your lawmakers.
I do want to talk really quickly about the platforms or journals that folks want to publish. So I think the first thing as a graduate student you want to find out is, what is the intention of your research? Is the intention to build in your field, add more perspectives into your field, find out different variables that could affect your research? Figure that out first. I think the intention is probably the most important part. And if you do want to publish and only keep it as for building on into your field, by all means, that's okay. That's actually a beautiful thing to do. And there's a lot of research that helps folks go from there to policy. So intention is the first important part. The next thing that I was thinking is, if you do want to have something published, look for local resources. In undergrad, working with Nicole, we kickstarted a research journal for undergraduate students to publish their research. From what I've heard, it's been going very successfully since I graduated, and it's a very beautiful thing that's under the Office of Undergraduate Research. So this is a wonderful program that people can look into to publish research starting from your undergrad. In the graduate level, there are so many avenues you can go to. Sometimes for my degree, publishing isn't always the end goal. A lot of PhD students and master students do not get published because their end goal is to have their voice heard or for them to add to the literature for local policymaking. We have in comparative politics, which is the umbrella that I'm under, there are Africanists, there are Europeanists, and then there are folks who are interested in Middle Eastern politics, and that we all contribute to the foreign policy literature in the end. And so I think looking into what your intention is really vital. I'm doing abortion rights in Europe. I'm confident my research will not impact local government, and that's okay. I don't want it to. I'm tired of impacting local politics. But a lot of my colleagues within my program are focused on American politics and local politics specifically. So you don't always have to spearhead the change. You can work with an organization that's also advocating for that, or lend your perspective and your research skills to a student who's working on that. So, for example, we have this undergrad graduate program in political science where folks can do both at the same time. And I'm working with a undergraduate student in like a mentorship capacity to get data on the census and local jurisdiction. And so these are things that we all can do on our end, advocating for local, national, international politics.
And I do want to add that on the local level, if you're interested in sharing your work, just in a more general sense, the Nevada Indie takes a lot of op-eds, the Las Vegas Sun takes a lot of op-eds, the Las Vegas Review Journal takes a lot of op-eds. And I noticed that a lot of these opinion pieces are published by just random citizens who feel very strongly about a topic. So it would be fantastic to have graduate student perspectives on a lot of these different things. Because like I said, you all are very intelligent people, you know, and I think a lot of times we don't talk a lot about the work that we're doing. We're just like, oh yeah, it's just another day in the life. But like at the end of the day, you are creating new work, you're researching new things, and you might be discovering like so many new things about yourself and then the field that you're in. And you could share that. You could share that with people, especially if you think that others will be interested in reading it. I see op-eds published all the time from just random people. And there are also, like, I know some of the graduate students here have published op-eds before in like Las Vegas Sun, Nevada Indie. So all of these like local papers are a really good place to start as well.
And I will say, lawmakers read that stuff. I can't tell you how often I read the Indie during session. I think during session because it's like while it's happening. But even, you know, prior to session, like I religiously read the Indie. I'm subscribed to their email. I think that they're a great media outlet. There are others too, like the Las Vegas Sun, the RJ. But definitely if you just want to start getting like in the know or involved, those are definitely places to start following policy that give really great press around some of the issues. And then I also just wanted to let everyone know I put my personal email and my cell phone in the chat. So if you would ever like to reach out to me or you want to, you know, talk about policy or get connected, there's my contact info. Shoot me an email, shoot me a text, or give me a call.
I also do want to mention that I write op-eds for my boss all the time. So if anyone, if you do write an op-ed and need someone to review it, there are folks available constantly at the UNLV Writing Center, at the UNLV Library, and you like political science building, I'll be there. And I'm more than happy to yeah, the Writing Center is probably one of my favorite resources that I've used even now, even now for work. I go to them a lot, and so there's a really good resource because English is not my first language, so sometimes like writing and editing is difficult for me, but they've really helped in 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 tailoring my writing to be more accessible to for op-eds and research.
Thank you. Does anyone else have questions for our panel? They all have very unique perspectives and experiences. So if you all have anything else you'd like to know, please go ahead and either type it in the chat or you can unmute yourself. So sometimes our research doesn't necessarily provide an answer, but instead it highlights a problem. When attempting to engage with policymakers, is there a difference between the research that's presented with a solution or research that's presented to advocate for the prioritization of an issue? So kind of is one taken more seriously than the other?
Sorry, what was the question? What if one?
So sometimes research just presents the problem, not necessarily a solution. So
Okay. Yeah, no, I think that that's the point of our jobs, right? Like we don't have all the answers. And I can even tell you when we were advocating for decriminalizing traffic, it was, I want to say it was decriminalizing traffic tickets. I'm not entirely sure, but I just remember this was like when I was an advocate and I had a conversation with the senator where she had asked, well, what is the solution? And we had thrown a number of solutions out there, but she felt like they weren't pertinent like to Nevada, I want to say. And so we were both kind of like, okay, well, we're here to figure it out together, right? So I don't think that, again, we don't have like, as lawmakers, we don't have all the answers. As people, we don't have all the answers. And I think that's the amazing part of being able to work on legislation together, is finding the answers out together. What can we do? What's the impact that we can have? What is, I think that it's very important to remember that we don't have the answers, and identifying the problem is the first step, right? Which is a great first step because, sometimes we don't know what problems are that exist in our community because a lot of times people live in their bubbles, right? And so definitely, in session, I can't tell you how many different things I learned about that I was like, I had no idea this existed, or I had no idea that this problem is impacting these people, right? So don't, I think my advice is to not get hung up on the nitty-gritties. And like I said, you can come to us and be like, hey, this is a problem that I have. I don't know how to fix it. Hey, we're experiencing this, or hey, I saw this in another state. I think that a lot of time legislation's modeled after other states too. And then we got to figure out, okay, but how does this work for Nevada, right? Whereas I could run a bill on 30 by 30, it being a resolution, but in another state, they could actually make it law, right? Because Nevada is unique in so many ways. So definitely, I think as people, we can get hung up on the problem solution answer, but when we're talking about policy, like I said, you're bringing so many different like people to the table that have so many different ideas of when we were working on the ending the suspension of driver's licenses, even an idea that I had thrown out was like, okay, well, what if we do it gradually? What if we, do, if your license was suspended by this time and this date, right? Like just throwing different ideas at that. It ended up working out where we did get it to where we wanted it. But, we can also take baby steps too. And I don't know if Jason has anything else to comment on that, because they do a lot of local level policy that probably looks different than the legislature as well.
Thank you, Saloon. So it's a yes or no. Yes, it's important to highlight issues in the community, and no, because solution isn't made or talked about. But there's you have the ability to circumvent this, and that's the way to, and the only way to do it is to talk to nonprofits and people who have been doing this work. My boss calls them like our elders. It's talk to folks who are in the community who've been doing this work for a long time, who are not researchers or graduate students or PhD candidates, but who have been able to live that experience and work on that. So, for example, regarding the redistricting, when when my colleague at the political science department wrote that having minority districts in Clark County is actually beneficial to accurate representation. We met with local AAPI organizations, we met with local Latino organizations, and we're able to talk to them about, do you think this is beneficial for the community? Because I'm not Latino and the researcher was not Latino. And I am questionably AAPI and the researcher was not. So we don't know what the need is in that community, but we do want to find out a resolution. And so asking them if representation is important to them is vital. And another thing, and a lot of researchers come to us about local issues like a legal representation for immigration. And that's something that we recently passed. We gave over $200,000, I believe, to the UNLV Immigration Clinic to create its own center in North Las Vegas dedicated to offering immigration services for free. Because usually when somebody from a different country, whether they're documented or undocumented, goes to court, they don't have a lawyer with them or they can't afford a lawyer. And that has been a barrier that we have witnessed, and we obviously saw the replication of it these last few years. And we want to make sure that doesn't happen again. So the creation of this clinic is very important. I know Assemblywoman Gonzalez worked on that in the Nevada legislature. I believe the NV Ledge gave 300,000.
I think it was 500,000.
Oh,
500,000, I think.
all right. Period.
It was huge. It was amazing.
Yeah, it's a great project because where you have millions of dollars going to these other institutions in our government that we don't need to have the funding go to, but this is definitely a need in our community because again, it is tailored to the needs of folks that we might not always have day-to-day access to. So always think like beyond what you're used to. Make yourself uncomfortable. In your research, in your field, it's important. It's actually it becomes. I love feel. I am writing about abortion rights as a cisgender heterosexual man. So there is that barrier of understanding, but a big part of it is reading about stories that are happening on the ground in Europe, and reading about what's going on in Poland with their ban on abortion, reading about Texas and their recent ban. And so figuring out what criminalization or decriminalization looks like. A big thing that a lot of folks have approached me from UNLV is decriminalizing sex work. And that has been a big conversation that we've been having internally as what does that look like for Clark County? Is there a need to address it locally? And is it viable? Is it something that our constituents want? Do they prefer legalization? What are the options? So just having those conversations is really important. And as a graduate student, being present in those conversations is vital. Usually folks who attend most of our meetings are upper class white men. And this is a big issue because as folks who are in charge of zoning and public works and all these local agencies are vital to everyday issues, we need proper representation at every single one of our meetings. So just be present, listen, make yourself uncomfortable, and put yourself in someone's shoes. I think that's the most important part.
I do also want to add, one of you had talked about it, but the ability, oh my gosh, give me a second, hold on. Um, okay, so there have been so many times where I have thought of a research idea or a project where I've been like, this is so new and so groundbreaking, and no one else has thought about this before. And then I go to do a literature review, and someone has definitely thought of it before, like 20 years ago in a psychology journal somewhere. So chances are the problems that you're identifying and things like that, they usually come down to some sort of systemic inequity. And I guarantee you that there are other people who are learning those things and studying those things as well. Talk to them, find out who they are, contact them, and just reach out to people based on their writing, based on their literature, just connecting with the community that you want to affect and that you want to change. Because there have been so many times where I've been like, this is a great idea. And then halfway across the university in a different department, someone else wants to also do that. So by talking to each other, you could combine your resources instead of just working at it by yourself.
Great, thank you. So if we're interested in attending a public meeting and speaking out about a specific item or issue, how do we go about sharing our point of view?
Nicole, I actually want you to talk about it because you have advocated a lot for students to be present in school trustees meetings and also. So I actually want to hear your perspective.
Oh, I love showing up to those meetings. So all the time, and all of our public institutions follow something called Nevada Open Meeting Law, which means that all of their agendas and action items are posted online, where you're able to see where the meeting is occurring, when it's occurring, and what they're talking about. So having that information in mind, there is a section called a public comment. So public comment is every single member of the public has the opportunity to take 3 minutes of the legislator's time for whatever meeting it is and talk about whatever they would like. Ideally, it's something to do with the agenda or something that they're voting on that day. So for the Board of Regents, for example, which oversee all of the Nevada system of higher education, so that's UNLV, UNR, CSN, Truckee Meadows, Nevada State, all of them. They have quarterly meetings, which like I think the next one is in December. They love hearing from students. So many times they don't hear from students and they just breeze through public comment. But if their meetings are virtual, you're able to submit public comment via an email and someone will read it out at the meeting, or you're able to submit it via a phone call and they will play the voicemail, or you're able to attend in person and speak during that time. So 100% utilize public comment for any meeting that you're going to. If it's a public and open meeting of any body, you could make public comment, and I highly suggest doing so. There have been so many times where I've been like, I feel really passionately about this, and they need to hear from me. So I'm going to show up and I'm going to talk about it.
I can only speak on the county and city level, just from work experience. I have attended all the school trustees meetings with Nicole when we were in CSUN, we were advocating for certain issues. We were basically there every meeting. So for the city and the county, there's also another section of the agenda called business items. And this is basically where one of the commissioners or city council folks, they can introduce a presentation to discuss a certain issue with the community. So this has happened a few times since I started working there, where graduate students approach me and say, hey, I just did amazing research on this topic about climate change in Clark County and how it's affecting West Las Vegas to East Las Vegas. And they want to talk about complete streets. They want to talk about uh, uh, the street heat effect. And so we were able to have them give a presentation discussing their research, and they made it to a PowerPoint. It was very pretty and it was amazing, and we were able to kind of figure out what is the issues and what is the research. And so then two meetings after that, they were able to come up to us and say, all right, I have worked with the Environmental Justice Coalition for Make the Road Nevada, and we have come up actually with some solutions of addressing this disparity from East Las Vegas to West Las Vegas. And a large part of it, as I don't know folks who are local, if you're able to drive through both, you can see that the difference in vegetation from both ends. So they said if we introduce these plants and these additions to the walkways of East Las Vegas, we can see that the temperature change can actually be reduced to basically even out within the next 5 years. And that is striking research that we have been looking for because we know that there's a big disparity from East Las Vegas to West Las Vegas, as well as medical effects of it all too. If you're not surrounded by plants and there's a factory near you, there's a higher chance of you getting ovarian cancer, lung cancer, and we all want to see our city and county rise together. I think the chair, Chair Kirkpatrick, she always says it's never a hand out, it's a hand up. And we need to make sure that we are able to bring folks to a safer, healthier environment. And that requires research. So we are privileged in being able to do this research. We have the resources, we have the capacity to do a lot of good things locally. So always reach out if you have ideas and you would like to present it to the county commission. And once you're able to present it, these are where advocacy orgs come in and say, hey, thank you for this research. Now we've been having this idea for so long that we want to do. Now we have research to back up what we need to do. And that's kind of how it's always been formed. Another big part of it is water conservation, which is a huge problem in Las Vegas and in the western United States. And a big part that we have been working on is removing, we call it decorative turf, which is basically like the decorative grass that you see between street pathways that is not really needed and just wasting water daily. If we can add vegetation that is more appropriate for our climate, then we can reduce our water outtake as well as increase better air quality. So we actually found out that grass is not really the best way to increase oxygen capacity in the county. I'm not a scientist, so I don't know the technical terms, but I'm able to basically say what we want and what we can do, and we made it a local policy, which also passed in the Nevada legislature a few months after that. So these are very big things that we're able to do, and that just comes from researchers like us. So please always reach out. I'm going to add my email to the chat, and I'm happy to discuss anything that you'd like.
Thank you so much. So we're nearing the end of our time here together today, but before we do end the session, we do want to thank our panelists so much for sharing your time, your experience with us today. And thank you for our participants for joining us. Before you all log off, if you all can just take a few minutes to fill out this workshop feedback survey, we would really appreciate that. Helps us as we continue to plan for next semester. I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Thanks again for joining us.